The Dow hit a record high.
Holding steady.
The economy.
Oh, we got your back, Jack. Make a great plan, man. Oh, real McCoy, Troy, our 3 cents for free. The options to pick, Nick. You need to discuss much. You got the key, KC, in exit strategy.
It's us again. You're listening to one of our favorite podcasts, and hopefully yours as well, Our 3 Cents. I'm here today with Casey Smith and Nick Antonucci, and I am Troy Harmon. And as always, we want to talk to you about some business strategy, including valuation and exit strategies. And today's topic, guys, let's talk about debt.
Well, debt's bad, right?
I mean, a lot of people think that's exactly the.
What are you, Dave Ramsey now?
Yeah, exactly.
No, no, you're not Dave Ramsey, and no, debt is not necessarily bad. It's a tool.
Exactly, I am kidding.
It's a tool.
But a lot of times, and you know, in our experience in meeting with business owners and doing valuations,
right.
they're like, oh, we don't have any debt.
Yeah,
and they're proud of that, which is
exactly, it's a point of pride.
Some people, sometimes it's a result of, we've talked to several business owners who fell on hard times during the 2008 recession, and they swore never again.
Yeah,
you know?
There's a risk to debt, no question.
Right. Sure.
But you know, if you're a business owner, chances are you're not all that risk averse. I mean, you've got to take a lot of risks as a business owner just to start a company. And,
exactly. Yep. Operational risk.
Manage a company is a risky business. So.
Yep. Yeah, no doubt. So why then would we say that? Let's do this. Let's step through first a few cons to debt. Actually, you get leverage when you add debt, right?
Yep.
Meaning that as the business grows, your equity in the business grows faster if you have some debt.
Correct.
But if things go bad, this is the con, right?
Yep.
Your equity goes down faster as well.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's one of the major issues. It adds a fixed cost. You're going to have to pay the debt no matter what your business
That's right.
Circumstances are, whether the economy, things beyond your control go awry. So KC, does it make sense? I know you guys always, KC's the financial planner on the group. You always talk about an emergency fund.
Yeah.
So maybe that's a concept we ought to talk about too. If you're going to have debt, make sure you set aside some cash. Don't use every single dime you have.
Sure. You have to make sure you're able to service that debt. And, you take a look at your cash flows from the business and operations. And if the debt service is something that's manageable, then it may make sense to do that, because there are plenty of good reasons to have debt as well, especially today in the extremely low interest rate environment that we're in.
Costs are low.
Costs are very low.
Well, that's always the case, though, isn't it?
Relative to equity, to raising equity.
That's what are the other two ways?
Correct.
What are other ways that you finance a business?
Exactly.
It's either you give someone ownership, or you keep everybody out of it and you borrow. And sources of borrowing, obviously, the first one that comes to mind is the bank. Some people will use credit cards. Obviously, in my opinion, the con to a credit card is you're going to pay high interest.
Oh, you're paying 20% interest versus you might be able to get a business loan, especially if it's SBA, for a much lower rate.
Right. Yeah. So borrowing wisely is what we're talking about here. Not just let's ramp up some credit card debt and go for it. Nick, when we do valuations, we have to figure out a business's cost of capital, right?
That's right.
And when you do that, the range that we find equity costs.
Oh, I would say equity costs is 2 to 3 times what we see for their cost of debt.
Right. But it's in that range of credit card debt, right?
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. To raise equity, absolutely. Yeah, you're in the 20s.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's good debt and there's bad debt. If you go to the bank, they're going to attach to some of your assets, maybe even your inventory. It might constrain your ability to, sell or trade in
certain assets.
Whatever they've attached to, but usually they're willing to work with you. So if you get rid of an older truck and you bring on a new one, the bank doesn't really mind that much.
And you're also building a
let you do that.
relationship with the bank for your future needs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know,
When we
as
talk
the
about an
business
emergency
grows.
fund, I mean, a lot of times the ability to borrow is sort of an extra safety net in terms of being able to access some liquidity, in a pinch if you need it. And to your point, Nick, building those relationships with bankers as a business owner is extremely
For sure.
important.
And that's a great thing to bring up, KC, is one of the questions we ask when we're meeting with business owners for valuation is, do you have access to lending?
Yeah.
You might be untapped, but you need to have some sort of credit line in place that you have access to should the need arise. Because what if you're suddenly, take COVID, for example. You're suddenly plunged into this unforeseen circumstance, and now you need access to capital quickly. And it may be short term. Maybe you just needed it for a few months to get back on your feet. Well, having those relationships established already, as I said, even if it's untapped, can be, a lifeline to your business.
Yep. Yeah. So, I think the point that we've made so far is it's a relative issue. When you're using debt, you're going to be able to borrow at a much lower cost than if you bring on a new partner, right? And when you bring on a new partner, what have you also done?
Diluted yourself, yeah.
You potentially have lost control. At the very least, you have someone else to be accountable to legally. Right. You can't just mistreat them and not give them anything. Give yourself a distribution and not your partner. That's absolutely absurd.
Sure.
You've brought in another person who, while you don't necessarily have to pay them, at some point, you're going to want to start making withdrawals or distributions from your business, and guess what? They'll stand there with their hand out too.
Well, and even if you're not giving up technical control, and meaning 51% of the equity, you're giving up 10% or whatever percentage of the ownership.
All right.
This new partner has a say in kind of what you do. At least even if you're running it, unless they're truly kind of a silent partner. They're going to want some level of impact on the business.
Yeah, they're going to at least have a portional vote, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And how much are you really going to get from that partner? It's a one-time deal. You can't keep selling equity in the business. I mean, I guess you could until you have absolutely no control, and then somebody else is going to start calling the shots, right?
Yeah.
So you're sitting here, you're thinking about it. You got control issues that you have to deal with a partner, and they're more expensive too. What's the benefit there?
Well, you mentioned more expensive, and we talked about how debt is cheaper, and that's before you even consider the tax benefit.
Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. So the government gives you a subsidy on your debt cost, right? You get to reduce your interest payment. You get to reduce that from your income before you pay the tax.
And then there's also, depending on who you go through, if you go through like an SBA type loan, sometimes there's incentives if you're going to get your loan through the Small Business Administration. Like I know coming out of the pandemic, I think your first 3 payments were waived.
Right.
Yeah.
Things of that sort. So it's important to explore what your options are.
And on the flip side, though, you do want to make sure, and this is something that you guys look at when we're evaluating public companies, is kind of what is your debt to equity ratio, and
Absolutely.
you don't want to be overly indebted to the point where there could come an issue with making those debt obligation payments.
Right, and not only that, the cost of debt, as you take on more and more, the cost of your debt is likely to rise.
Sure.
And why is that? Because your probability of bankruptcy gets greater and greater as you go along. So, Casey, great point. I mean, the probably one of the first things is, all right, so you convinced me I want to take on some debt. How much?
Yeah.
You have to look at your ratios, your debt to equity, your debt to assets. Really, probably the debt to assets is the bigger one. And at some point, when the bank tells you, "Nope, sorry, you're too big a risk," you've probably gone a little too far.
Right. No, and as a financial planner, we do this for individual clients to a large extent. When we're recommending at today's interest rates, sometimes it makes sense to pull out some equity from your house and actually take a mortgage out. Same kind of concept. If you can afford those payments, and our on the financial planning side, we have the 10-year rule, and you're going to set aside the money, kind of like the emergency fund that you mentioned earlier,
Sure.
Troy, so that you know that you're going to have at least a portion of those debt payments set aside, so that if the time comes that there's a rainy day and your cash flow isn't what you thought it might be or projected it would be, then you can tap that sort of emergency fund to be able to make those payments. So cash flow is extremely important when regard to, kind of figuring out what your debt to equity structure needs to look like.
Absolutely. So, we've covered a lot already. Nick, let's get a little bit technical for a minute. So how does debt make my business worth more? I'll start it off, and maybe you can chip in and help me, because it gets a little technical. You tell somebody you should have borrowed more money, and they look at you like you're from Mars. It would have made your business worth more. So here's the concept. Any investment is worth the present value of its future cash flows.
Yep.
So in planning, KC, whether it be for a business or for an individual's income, in order for you to derive a plan, maybe to determine what their net worth is, or to determine the valuation or the value, more specifically, of a business, you figure out what you believe is going to be. You forecast those cash flows that you expect to have in the future.
Yep.
And then you have to bring them back to present value, right?
Yep.
$1 today is not as valuable as $1 tomorrow, right?
That's right.
And the reason that it's not is because it's going to cost you something to make that money.
Yep.
So what you have to do is you take those future cash flows and you divide every single one of them by the cost of capital for the business.
Right.
Again, we were talking about it earlier. Your main focus, if you're the CFO, and if you're a one-man show business owner, you are the CFO, CEO, COO, you're everything, right?
Yeah.
So your main job as the CFO is to keep your cost of capital as low as possible. In this case, you would take all those future cash flows that you just forecasted, you divide them by 1 plus the cost of capital, raise it to whatever the power is into the future. Sorry, really technical, but that's the way it's got to be. Mm-hmm. You bring all those future values back at their present value, you add them all up, and that's the valuation that you get on your business, right?
Yep.
So
discounted cash flow method evaluation.
Precisely. So, it's pretty technical, but there is a reason that I would tell you that your valuation is very, very important to get the financing decision right.
Yep.
Yeah. So,
One thing about too, just and because I like to use kind of examples and raw numbers, but let's say you have an asset that's worth $100,000. And you borrow 80% of the value of that asset. So $80,000 is debt financing, and 20% is your kind of down payment, or
your equity.
Your equity.
Right. So you and the bank own it. 80-20. The bank's got 80. Right.
So the asset grows by 5%. So it's now worth $105,000, right?
Yep.
So let's just say that's a 1-year period. You've made some payments on the debt, but for simplistic purposes, your equity, the asset grew by 5%, but your equity grew by 25%, right? Because you had 20,000 in, now your equity is 25. So that's just an example of the power of leverage.
Yep.
To your point earlier, Troy, that can go the other direction.
It can, yeah. So if it goes down 95, then your value of equity has fallen 25%.
Exactly.
Easily relatable to think about your house. I think most people can understand it in that aspect.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so that's, there's a lot of reasons to consider debt financing. It certainly is dependent on the nature of the business. If you have very inconsistent cash flows and you can't, it's not easy to predict when you're going to get paid for certain things, that makes it a little more difficult. If you have very consistent cash flows and you kind of know what to expect in your business, and it's a relatively steady growth, then maybe debt financing makes more sense.
Absolutely.
So you really have to look at the structure of your business, what you're hoping to accomplish. But in general, debt is not bad.
Yeah, just trying to destroy that connotation that debt is a bad thing.
Yeah, a lot of folks would call that kind of depression mentality where you don't want to have any debt, just consider this. Debt is a tool. Yeah. It's a tool that can hurt you like a chainsaw. Yeah. It could hurt you, but it can also help you cut the trees down. I mean, just consider it. That's the best way to deal with it.
That's a good analogy.
There we go. All right.
I was going to give them a way to get in touch with us.
Oh, we got to do that. Miss.
Yeah. So give us a call at 770-429-9166.
There you go. How about that? You even had to stand up.
I know.
Is your vision getting bad?
I'm getting old.
You can't see it from
Grandpa
here.
Millennial, remember?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. The Grandpa Millennial. All right, Nick, get to work on that bank sponsor for our podcast.
I'm on it.
All right. Good deal. Thank you for listening to our 3 Cents podcast, and we'll catch you next time.
You just need to commence, gents. Make a great plan, man. A real McCoy, Troy. Our 3 cents for free.